I started up. I went up, and when I got to the top, I couldn't hold my skirt down and hold on to the rail, so I chose the skirt and I pushed it down. And then I went up. All of me went up, all the way to the top. And I was spinning around, and I looked, and there comes the bouncy house, and it boom hit me twice. 1, 2, 3, right on the left. And on the fourth one, I went right down into the jumpy house. Well, at least I wasn't going to get hit by flying objects, but I was having trouble breathing, and I passed out. I don't know how long I was out, but I woke up and I wasn't in the bouncy house. I was in something, I was in a bubble. A small bubble. It was kind of flat. Oh, and there was a bright light coming down, so bright I could hardly look at it. Oh, I know what to do. You stand up and walk toward the light. I read books, but I can't stand up, and I'm not too tall. Well, just then, a ladder came down. 2 little men come jumping around. They had green shoes with gold buckles. Well, they were dressed all in green. They even had a green top hat, and they were jolly, and they were scooting around, and I was sitting, and they came. Well, they were about as high as my foot is tall. And one of them and I shrunk just a little bit taller than the little green men. Who are you? And where do you come from? Joyce. I'm from West Sacramento. That's in California. Yeah, I know. We're lost. We need to go to San Jose. San Jose? I've never heard of it. You must. You live in California. Oh, no. Not Jose. Jose. Jose who? Oh, no. In your navigator, put in San Jose. You're right. We gotta go. We're late. And they closed up the hole, and we went up, and the big white clouds parted, and there was a huge rainbow. And we floated right up on top. And slowly we slid. It was a nice ride, slide down. I told them some stories. They liked that. And we dropped right into a gold pot. We climbed down, and I gotta go, and they had to go, and wait. I'm a little short. Oh. Okay. Put your finger alongside of your nose, across your lips, and put your thumb under your chin. And I grew up. I was just like everything. And I turned around and said thanks. And they were gone. And I saw, Brenda. She came. Where have you been? I've been looking for you for over an hour. The hotel said you took the shortcut. I did. But there was you know what? I must have taken the long cut. Let's go.
Okay, so while the judges are tabulating the scores, I'm going to be asking all the tellers to tell us a little bit about their experience with storytelling. So Joyce, how did you get involved with storytelling?
Oh, well, I taught for 40 years, and there's nothing better than stories in teaching. It's your best tool. And then my daughter read in the paper about the Sacramento Storytellers Guild. So after I retired, I started going to the meetings, and I met a lot of people, and they helped me learn to tell to adults. And now I love to tell to adults in person. I hate you.
All right. Thank you so much, Joyce. So our next teller is going to come to us from the world of Zoom. His name is Dave Tarvin. He's also a member of the Sacramento Storytellers Guild. He's also involved with the Foothill Storytelling Guild. And he has loved this Zoom because he's had a chance to tell stories all over the world, like many of us. So please welcome Dave Tarvin.
My name's Dave, and I used to work at the Big Rock, Little Rock mining company up on Sugartop Mountain. Now, I drove a dump truck there. I delivered limestone. I drove from the mine up near Coloma, California, and delivered that limestone to a plant in Sacramento, California. And all my co-workers, they always teased me. They said that I had a lead foot. And they even gave me a nickname. They used to call me the original Turbo Dave. Well, one day, this one particular day, my truck was all loaded up and I was making my way through the mine, and I was pulling up the last grade to get out of the mine onto the road, Bone Man Hill. And I was about just up to the top when all of a sudden the engine died. I jumped on the brakes and the truck just sat there on the side of the hill for a moment. And then it started to slide back. I could smell smoke, and I knew that those brakes wouldn't hold. That truck, fully loaded, weighed 37 tons. And sure enough, those brakes did fail. And that truck started rolling down the hill. Pretty soon it started to careen all over the place. And when I got down to the bottom of the hill, it jumped the road and it went plummeting down the side of Sugartop Mountain. It was a wild ride. Well, about halfway down, I ran right into a great big ponderosa pine. And when that truck hit that tree shook. Then it shuddered, and then it juddered, absorbing the impact of that 37 tons. But the truck stopped. I sat in the front seat, absolutely stunned. After a moment, I started to hear this weird sound, this whooshing sound from way up in the treetops. Soon, a bunch of limbs started raining down on the truck. And then all of a sudden, that whooshing got louder and louder and louder. And then boom, something fell in the back of that truck. Well, I was just mildly curious, so I opened the door and I stepped out on that little truck step and I peeked up over the truck bed to see what was back there. And there was this huge, black, furry mass. And as I gazed at it, it stretched itself out and then it rose up from the truck bed until it was standing erect, its arms stretched outward. It was an 8-foot tall, 500-pound Bigfoot. And when it saw me, got pretty angry. It leaned forward, threw out its arms, and roared at me. Scared the heck out of me. I fell out of the truck, and when I hit the ground, that mountain was so steep, I just started rolling. Well, that triggered something in the Bigfoot. He jumped out of the truck, and he started chasing me down the mountain. Well, after a while, I got my footing, and when I was up on my feet, man, I was running. I lived up to that nickname, Turbo Dave. And that Bigfoot, he was right on my tail. Well, pretty soon I was at the bottom of the mountain, and I came out, and right there was the American River. I dove in, swam across. I was on the other shore. I turned and I looked towards the forest to see if Bigfoot was still coming. Suddenly he popped out of the forest. He was going so fast. He had such momentum, he couldn't slow down. And he went headlong into the river. Well, when he hit that water, he started flailing around in the water. And he started screaming and yelling. And I was standing there watching, pretty confused, until I realized Bigfoot can't swim. Now, I'm not sure what happened, but something in me just kind of clicked. I dove back into the river. I swam to Bigfoot. I dove underneath him, and I grabbed that big, humongous, black, furry leg, and I pulled and I pulled and I pulled, and I shoved it down to the riverbed. And when he touched the riverbed, he suddenly just stood up, and he shook himself like some old big giant black dog, and water went everywhere. Well, we were standing there, he looking at me looking up at him. And suddenly a smile broke out across his face. And he reached down and he grabbed me and he gave me this big, old, gigantic Bigfoot hug, and he squeezed. He squeezed so hard that I started yelling. Felt like my ribs were breaking. Well, when I started yelling, he let me go. And we just stood there, and he looked kind of confused. So I held out my hand to him just like this. He reached down and he grabbed my hand, and then he began to shake it. And he shook it so strong, I started kind of bouncing around in the water. Well, when we were done with that, we were good friends. And so we just stood there for a minute, kind of recognizing that we're good friends now. And then Bigfoot turned, walked out of the river, and he slowly disappeared into the forest. And as he did, I raised my hand and I gave him a nice goodbye wave. And I thought to myself, it must be wonderful to be a Bigfoot, but it's better to be a Leadfoot.
Hey, I have a new name for you, Leadfoot. So, Dave, can you tell us how you got involved with storytelling?
Well, I volunteered at a storytelling festival just for something to do. And when I saw the storytelling and what they were doing, actually, I volunteered to do the Liars contest there. And it just resonated with me. In my work, I used to tell stories all the time to make a point. And so to get into storytelling was a good way to utilize that skill. And so I started doing it, and I've been doing it ever since. And I've enjoyed it a lot.
All right, Dave. Well, thank you so much for that story. Enjoyed it.
All right.
Our next storyteller is going to be new for me. I've never heard her tell stories before, so I'm very excited to hear Chris Lindstrom. She, during the pandemic, she joined the South Bay Storytellers and Listeners down in the Los Altos area. So she's up here visiting us. She's going to be live, so please welcome Chris Lindstrom.
When I was 12 years old, my mother told me I'd be going to a new school that fall in a town you might have heard of. It's just about 20 miles south of here, Lodi. Okay. This was not a shocking announcement. Mom and Dad were always checking out new schools to get the best math education. That, and my foster sister was always getting kicked out. Politely asked not to return to many of the schools we attended. So we went to a lot of new schools, no problem. Everything's great until we get to fractions. Do you remember fractions? Do you remember how to divide fractions? You take the fraction in the denominator, you take its numerator, make it the denominator, make its denominator the numerator, you take that whole thing and multiply it by the original numerator. Easy, right? Well, there was one little boy who just couldn't understand. Honestly, I'm not sure I actually understood either, but I grew up evangelical fundamentalist, so following strange arbitrary rules was normal for me. I'm just filling out the worksheet, doing as many problems as I can. This little boy actually is trying to understand. He's raising his hand, he's asking questions. Finally, the teacher says, the reason you cannot understand is because you are too stupid to understand. Woo! She walks over to his desk, she bends down like she's going to look at his workbook, and then quicker than you can blink, her neck snakes out, chomp, takes a little bite right out of his ear. No. My friend Brian just looks horrified, but no one else even seems to notice, not even the little boy who got bit. Well, something had to be done, so I went home to Mom and Dad. I did not tell them about the biting. I thought they might think that was my imagination because I was always reading those books about wizards and dragons and books their church friends I think thought were demonic. So ixnay on the Iding Bay. But I did tell my mother that the teacher was calling students stupid. So off she marches to have a chat with the principal. He assures her he will investigate and get back to her. Meanwhile, the biting continues. This one little girl comes in late one day, and as she's walking by the teacher, chomp, bite right out of her shoulder. She helps a little boy put a Band-Aid on, and chomp, right out of his forearm. Finally, the principal calls my mother. He's finished his investigation. I'm like, yay, we're going to get rid of this monstrous teacher. But no, he says the problem isn't the teacher. The problem is us. Can you believe that? My mother says, thank you so much for that information. Click. But Mom and Dad believed in voting with their feet. Before you could say Rumpelstiltskin, I was carted off and registered at yet another new school, which was a relief. But I did feel bad for all my compatriots back there at Monster Central. Every time Brian and I hung out, we'd argue. I said the teacher must be a vampire. He said, no, she's not drinking blood, just taking tiny bites of flesh. We had to know. So one night we sharpened some twigs, we put garlic on our face, and we ride our bikes over to her house. So we sneak up the driveway. I heard the loudest insect noises. I mean, the chirping, the clacking, the buzzing. What was that? We hide behind a bush in her side yard. We get up on tiptoe and look in the window. And there she is. She's the one making the insect noises while she's chirping at the TV. I mean, this was the 80s. We didn't have Zoom. It should have been a rerun of Hogan's Heroes, but instead there's some like cartoon version of a military commander with a big purple face and red eyes and 3 antennae coming out of his head, each one of them operating independently. But I only had about 30 seconds to watch and listen because my friend Brian, he dropped his water bottle. The chirping stopped. I said, Brian, we gotta get out of here now. We race down the driveway. We jump on our bikes and ski-daddle. On the way home, I noticed the sky gets super bright, like when there's a lightning strike, but there's no lightning. There's no thunder. There's not even a cloud in the sky, just this momentary brightness. Well, the next time I saw Brian, he said the teacher never came back to class. They had a substitute for the entire rest of the year. The scuttlebutt was that she'd had a family emergency and had to move back to Ohio. Brian and I kind of thought she'd had to move a little farther than Ohio, but we kept that to ourselves. And ever since then, I find myself wondering, what is it about Lodi? As far as I know, there's no secret Air Force base there. The only thing I've been able to conclude is that somehow the tastiest earthlings must live in Lodi.
All right. Okay, I'm so glad I've got to hear you now. I'm looking forward to hearing more stories from you. So, Chris, can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved with storytelling?
Sure. So I've done some volunteer work with the children's camp, and a few years ago I wrote a activity for the children. The idea being, if you can learn a little storytelling, you can change your internal narratives, you know, so you're not so down on yourself and you can give yourself options. And then when the pandemic, when I thought it was ending, I thought maybe I should, you know, find some activities to interact with real humans again. And I saw the South Bay Storytellers, and I thought, oh, that sounds fun. So I gave it a try. I've been trying my hand at different genres. So
nice. All right. All right. It's always nice to welcome new tellers into the fold. Okay, so our next storyteller is a longtime storyteller. She represents the Do Tell Story Swap, which is over in Santa Rosa. She has a long history with them. I've heard her tell stories. She's a fantastic storyteller. Please welcome, via Zoom, Sharon Elwell.
I don't expect you to believe this story. Nobody I have told it to has ever believed me, least of all, my poor dear husband, Richard, who suffered more than anybody else from the strange affliction that came over me. It started innocently enough on a bright spring morning, and Richard was hard at work at the computer doing something, and when I came into the room, he looked up and said hi, and to my own surprise, out of my mouth came, "Good morning, good morning, good morning." He said, "Somebody's in a good mood today." I said, "Zippity-doo-dah, zippity-yay." He said, "Well, I'm glad that you're so cheerful, but I'm trying to get some work done here, and I'd appreciate it if you'd maybe go in another room or even outside. Look out there." I said, "Oh, what a beautiful morning." He said, "Yes, well, I appreciate how you're feeling. Could you go feel that way somewhere else so that I could get my work done?" And I said, "But I feel a song coming on." He's beginning to get a little bit annoyed. And he said, "Are you doing this on purpose, just to irritate me?" I said, "You're so vain. You probably think this song is about you." Well, by now, he was kind of gently shuffling me out the door. And when it closed behind me, you'd think that would have been the end of that episode. But no, I stood right outside that door and I sang, "Open the door, Richard. Open the door and let me in." I knew that I was in terrible trouble. Something had come over me. I was out of my own control. I called my primary care physician. And when I went, she said, "Well, I've heard of involuntary vocalization, but never at this level, and certainly never directed to a specific person. Let's check you out." So they did an EEG and a CAT scan and an MRI, and there was nothing out of the ordinary. So she said, "It's got to be psychological. I'm going to send you a referral." So off I went to the psychologist, and he listened for just a couple minutes when he said, "Oh, this is a clear-cut case of passive aggressive. Your conscious mind may not know it, but your unconscious mind is harboring a lot of anger toward your husband, maybe toward all men." Well, That's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard in my life. And so I never paid any more attention to what he said. I would never, never do anything to harm or even disturb Richard. He's the ideal husband. He's handsome and intelligent, and of course, very wealthy. But the problem did not cease. And as the days and weeks went by, everything the man said, I sang something to him. And finally, he packed up and moved into our condo. Now, you would think that that would have been the end of that. You would think so. But I left messages on his voicemail. I called him on Ring Central, FaceTime, WhatsApp, Zoom. Won't you come home, Bill Bailey? Won't you come home? Eventually, the neighbors in the condo area told me that they were there the night that 911 came and the EMTs carried him out. He was screaming, "She won't stop. She'll never stop." Well, once I had the conservatorship, of course, I was able to be sure that he was put into a really wonderful facility. I'm sure he'll be happy and comfortable there for the rest of his life. But my nerves were a little frazzled. So I booked a luxury round the world cruise for myself. And the very first night on board, a nice looking, well-dressed man came up to me and asked if I would like to go for a drink. And before I could stop myself, I said, I'm just a girl who can't say no.
Oh, my goodness. Well, thank you for the wonderful laughs. Really enjoyed that. And so since you can't say no, tell us how you got involved with storytelling.
Well, like Joyce, I taught for many years, and the teachers used to get together and go up to Mariposa to the festival. And oh, it was just the most wonderful day to just sit and have stories from everywhere roll over you. And I just enjoyed myself so much there that after time, I kept thinking, you know, maybe I could do this. And then when I moved to Santa Rosa and found out they had a group of people who would do it together and you could do it with them, it was just a thrill for me. So I've enjoyed it very much.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Sharon. Okay, our next storyteller, liar, comes from the Seattle, Washington area. She lives in Ellensburg, but I met her at the Seattle Storytellers Guild, and we took a workshop together about lying. And she started a group called the Little Liars Group, and that's going now. And if you want to get in touch with her after this event, Dave Tarvin's part of that group. I've been part of it, and you might get together with her and practice lies. Please welcome Marty Fallshort. Oh, you have Camille? Oh.
Yeah, I have Camille then.
Oh, yeah. I do have Camille. Okay.
So should I go or should Camille go?
Does it matter?
Camille doesn't look like she's quite ready. Camille, are you ready to go?
Whatever you want to do.
Okay, let's go with Camille then. Got her on. Let's just go ahead and introduce her.
Okay, all right. So I guess we're going with Camille, who is on the list. And I've just learned how to do reading. You know, it's a new event for me. So Camille Miller, I've heard her before. She's been part of the Story Masters. They're a Toastmasters group in Los Angeles, and she's told with the Storytelling Association of California at some of our genre events. And she's a wonderful storyteller. And please welcome Camille Miller. And this is not a lie.
It was the wee hours of the morning, and I drank too much water before going to bed. I really had to use the restroom, but I didn't want to leave my snuggly covers. I tossed back and forth trying to make it stop, but that just didn't work. So I tumbled out of bed and stumbled into the restroom. While washing my hands, I thought, I should get a midnight snack. I grabbed my fluffy pink robe and crept down the stairs. I didn't want to wake my roommate as I was planning on hijacking his leftover pepperoni pizza. Downstairs, I flicked on the light, and there, in the middle of the kitchen floor, was, dare I say, a cockroach. He looked at me, and I looked at him, and for a moment, we had a stare-off. Then he shook his finger at me and said, "Nice robe." And then he scurried off into the crack between the kitchen countertop and the sink. Not to be outwitted, I grabbed my miniature telescope that I picked up on a tour at the Willy Wonka factory and shoved it into the crack. I was surprised at what I saw. There, in the crevices of the kitchen, was a whole roach community. There was a chamber of commerce, a church, a gym, a restaurant, and yes, even a roach motel. The sign outside the church said, "First Insect Church." Inside the church, there were S-shaped rows of packing peanuts with 1 roach per peanut. Except for the pregnant roaches, they got 2 peanuts. With the choir, they sang, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a roach like me." In the gym, there were mostly male cockroaches. I know this because the male cockroaches have wings. There were a few female cockroaches, but they were mostly there batting their eyes and twirling their antennae in an attempt to get attention. One by one, a roach would grab a pair of thumbtacks, stand in front of a piece of broken mirror, and proceed to do bicep curls. In the corner of their gym, there were stacks of toothpicks and Cheerios. Well, there was this one particularly muscular cockroach who strutted over to the corner, grabbed the toothpick, and put 4 Cheerios on either side. He bent down in deadlift position and was huffing and puffing, and the girls were cheering, "Go Roachie, go Roachie, go Roachie." Then, in a show of majestic strength, he stood straight up, accomplishing his feat. Grinning, he flexed his middle legs. Mwah, mwah. The gym, it also had a sauna, and in it were senior veterans trading war stories of those who were exterminated before them and of the times they got stepped on but survived. "I remember seeing the bright red heel coming down on me. It took out one of my legs, and I've been living with 5 legs ever since." Not far from the gym was the restaurant. I really had to squint to see the name. Ah, yes, there it is, Breadcrumbs. Each table was made out of a perfect square white paper napkin. Some of the tables had grits. I thought I swept those grits up last night, but I guess not. Some of the tables had my hair. They must have stolen it out of the bathroom trash before I had a chance to empty it. I overheard waitresses Rochella and Rochina plotting. "Girl, let's go back to that bathroom tonight, get some more of that hair. I need that for my weave." When I saw what was on the next table, my blood really began to boil. The cockroaches were having a birthday party for a set of quintuplets, and the waiter brought out a huge slice of pepperoni pizza. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I bellowed, "That's my pizza!" At once, 1,000 cockroach eyes looked at me. I heard the cadence of tiny cockroach legs. They were coming after me, faster and faster. And just as the army of cockroaches swarmed my big toes, I tumbled backward and let out a blood-curdling, "Ah!" And that's when I woke up. Breathing heavily, I turned on the light to see it was 3 o'clock in the morning. I grabbed a notepad beside my bed and wrote a note to myself to call the exterminator in the morning. Still a bit flustered, I grabbed my fluffy pink robe and crept down the stairs. And there, in the middle of the kitchen floor, was a cockroach. And he said to me, "Nice robe. And by the way, I ate all the pizza." Back to you.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that story. So can you tell us how you got involved with storytelling?
Well, I started in Toastmasters, and they say that the most effective way to relay a message is through a story. So I went on Meetup, and I actually live in the Bay Area. So I went over to the Orinda Contra Costa Tale Spinners, and that's the club I first got into, and now I'm a part of Story Masters in Los Angeles. So that's why I got here.
All right. Yay. Okay. We're glad you're here and with us. So our next storyteller is Marty Fallshore. And the reason I got confused is because her nickname is Camille Miller. So I mean, that was the problem. So you all know Marty. So please welcome Marty Fallshore.
I haven't started yet, but I was so excited that there was another person that I could get in touch with in Ellensburg in the name of Camille Miller. And imagine my disappointment when I realized she wasn't really here. Anyway, I apologize for the video and everything, but my computer wasn't working. Okay, now I'll start. My father always wanted to be an orchestra conductor. In fact, he had an album called Music for Frustrated Conductors that came with a conductor's baton, and he would be in the living room conducting all these fabulous orchestras all the time to the LP. And we lived in a small town in Alabama at this time, and eventually moved to Atlanta when I was about 6 so that we could have more cultural opportunities. So in Atlanta, we would go to the symphony and the opera and musicals and plays and all kinds of artistic events. Now, this was during the 60s when people actually dressed up to go out. We dressed up to go shopping, of all things. My dad actually owned a tuxedo, so he could wear it to all the events. And my mom often wore this red dress with a full skirt and her ivory earrings with a matching pin and matching purse and shoes. And she was the prettiest mama out there, I tell you. And I loved my petticoats. I would put on my petticoats, especially my pale blue dress that had little pearl buttons down the front, and I'd wear my little gloves and have my little purse and my white patent leather shoes, and we would go out to the symphony or opera or whatever. And of course, a lot of other people went to those things, and at the end, all those people and us left. And we'd get in our car and get out of the parking lot and end up on this road that had a stop sign for us and ongoing traffic on the intersection. And we had to turn right at that intersection. It would take a long time. So my father got the bright idea to let my mom drive, walk the 1/10 of a mile or so to the intersection and conduct the traffic. until our car came up, and then he'd get in and we would go home. Well, he liked that so much. He always parked in the same parking lot, and he would take his conductor's baton and put it in the car. And at the end of the show, he would go out and conduct the traffic using his conductor's baton. And when the car would come up, he'd get in and we'd drive off. And I often sat nearby on a yard that was right there to watch him conduct the traffic. Well, and you can imagine he's in this tuxedo and he's out there, he's 6'1", little goatee, bald, out there conducting traffic. On this night in particular, he's conducting like usual, and these two cop cars pull in opposite directions, completely blocking the intersection. And the cops get out and tell my father he has to go back in his car and leave. And they tell him he can't be doing that. It's dangerous. He doesn't have a license. Get back in your car. Meanwhile, the people nearby are getting out of their cars and telling the cops that he's doing a good thing. Let him finish. And he's told them that he'll just get back in the car and leave when he's done, but the cops are adamant. You have to get back in your car. Nobody's going to be directing traffic. And meanwhile, more people nearby are getting out of their cars and starting to yell at the cops to let him keep doing what he was doing, that it was a good thing. And it's escalating. And the police call in reinforcements, including a paddy wagon, and these policemen in riot gear arrive. And meanwhile, more and more people have come forward to tell them that he's doing a good thing. One of the cops volunteers to direct traffic in his place, and they're like, no, let him do it. And this little old lady, this Ruth Bader Ginsburg kind of lady, wearing a white beaded gown with matching purse and shoes and hat, takes her purse and wham, hits one of the cops and says, let the man do what he's been doing. That's when they freak out and they say, everybody, you're arrested, get into the wagons. And the riot police herd everybody, including my father, into the paddy wagons. I go back to the car and tell my mom that Dad just got arrested, and she kind of rolls her eyes like it's a normal thing. It takes hours to get out of there because there are a lot of cars that don't have drivers anymore and they have to tow those. We finally get home. And my dad gets bailed out the next day. Does it change his behavior? No, he conducted traffic until he couldn't do it anymore. And then when he couldn't do it anymore, he passed the baton on to me. And I continue the tradition, as will my children and their children. And so, thank you.
All right, thank you, Marty. Can you tell us how you got involved with storytelling?
Well, I was a teacher too and used storytelling, of course. And I would go to the storytelling festivals and Northwest Folk Life, and I always thought, man, that would be so much fun, and especially the lies. And like Ed said, I did start a little liars group, and if anybody's interested, I can give you my information and you can get in touch. We meet the third Mondays of the month at 6 o'clock Pacific time.
Nice. So yeah, Marty, please put your email or communication in the chat so people can get a hold of you if they're interested.
I can do that.
All right, thank you. So our next storyteller comes to us from the East Coast, from Massachusetts. I met him at various storytelling events around the world, and he's a fantastic storyteller, and he also is the director of a group called Story Space, and he can put that in the chat too. I understand that this is the oldest ongoing storytelling event in the United States for many years, or maybe not, who knows? But so please welcome Bruce Marcus.
Thank you, Ed. And yeah, we just celebrated our 30th anniversary at the Story Space, and you can join us Tuesday evenings online at 7 p.m. on Zoom. So just Google The Story Space, and we have a featured storyteller every month. Ed was one of our features, in fact. So there. All right, and now my story. One evening a while back, I received a phone call from my wacky friend Henry. "Dude in distress," he said. I drove into a pothole. "Okay," I said. "Where are you this time?" "Thanks, buddy boy. I knew I could count on you," he said. "Com Ave, Boston, in front of Wilderness House." "Okay," I said. "I'll be right over there." Henry said, "You'd better bring a crane." Well, as I approached the block where he had mentioned, I thought maybe Henry had been towed already because I didn't see his beat up old green Plymouth anywhere. And then I saw why. Just in time, I jammed on the brakes, screeching to a stop. Amid a chorus of blaring horns, I hopped out of my car, trotted forward, and came to a halt. There before me was the largest pothole I'd ever seen. It was longer than a car is long, wider than a car is wide, and I stood at its edge looking 15 feet straight down onto the roof of a checkered cab. Turned out Henry's car was the 6th car beneath that, and his wasn't even on the bottom. Miraculously, nobody was hurt. There was one woman who was on her way home with pizzas to feed her large family, and another fellow was on his way to a friend's house to watch a Red Sox game on TV with a case of beer. When the others found out there was pizza and beer, this little impromptu party had broken out. The party was in full swing by the time I arrived, so I ran into Wilderness House and came out 5 minutes later with an armload of rock climbing gear, a rope, harness, carabiners, and such. I rigged up a top rope system that I anchored to the Denver boot that was clamped onto the front wheel of a black Beamer parked beside the pothole. When everything was secure, I threw the free end of the rope down into the twilight below. Well, by now, all the beer was drunk, as were the people who were drinking it. And nobody was in too good a shape to climb out, but one by one, climb out they did until finally Henry, smiling, struggled up to street level and the rescue mission was over. But not my story. As it turned out, one of the people down in the pothole was an attorney. While she was down there, she drafted a proposal to the city of Boston offering up all the cars that were there as landfill. In exchange, the city of Boston had to buy all the drivers to compensate for their loss a brand new car. Well, everybody had enthusiastically signed the agreement, and within a few days it was a done deal. The pothole was filled, the street was paved over, and everybody had a brand new set of wheels. Well, Henry was thrilled. His had been an older model car. It had rust everywhere, but the only thing that wasn't rusty was his cell phone antenna. His one regret was that after calling me, he'd laid his cell phone onto the passenger seat. And amid all the excitement and the beer, he'd forgotten all about it and left it behind. And now it was entombed, along with his car, deep beneath Commonwealth Avenue. Well, about a week later, I got a funny idea. I decided to dial up Henry's cell phone, see if anybody answered. It rang. And then someone picked up. There was this kind of scuffling sound. And then this peculiar voice came on and said, "Hello?" Turned out I was talking to a sewer rat. That's who he said he was. And I don't know how I came to believe him, but in a short time I did. As you can imagine, I was tongue-tied. Yeah, I said, how are things down there? Under the street, I mean. Things were grand, he said, ever since the cars arrived. The pizza crust and the pools of spilled beer the rats had enjoyed quite a bit. They were making very good use of Henry's cell phone. And one of the cars had left a good sound system along with some CDs. I particularly liked the rat music, he said. Rat music. Well, he played me an example. This pumping bass beat came on, accompanied by a angry male voice talking about the horrors and the hopelessness of his urban neighborhood in rhyme. "Ah," I said, "you mean rap music." "Oh," he said, "Is that what it is? It's kind of dark down here. Difficult to read the inserts." Well, after my little chat with the rat, I debated whether or not to tell anybody that it had taken place. I was afraid people might kind of question my sanity. I really wanted to tell Henry because I knew that in the not distant future he would be receiving a phone bill with some rather hefty and unexpected long distance charges. But I kept the whole thing to myself. In fact, after another week had gone by, I began to wonder if the conversation had ever actually taken place. So I dialed my rat friend once again. Once again, the phone rang. And someone picked up, but it was an entirely different someone. It seems that in the interim, Henry's phone number had been switched to another customer, an office, a City of Boston office at that, and not just any City of Boston office. Good afternoon, a cheerful young woman's voice chimed. Pothole hotline. Well, no sooner had I extricated myself from that call when my telephone rang again. It was Henry. You're not going to believe this, buddy boy, he said. I drove into another pothole. Henry, I said, are you a AAA member? It wouldn't do any good, he said. They don't have AAA here. What do you mean? Who's they? Listen, he said, I need you to wire me some money. Wire you money for what? Airfare. Airfare? Where are you going? Home, I hope. Home? Then where are you? Okay, he said. You remember last Wednesday when I drove to Kenmore Square to buy some Red Sox tickets? I drove into this pothole then. Last Wednesday? That was half a week ago. Right, he said. And I've been falling ever since. For 3 days, falling inside this pothole. I only just landed just now. Henry, that's impossible. What are you talking about? Landed? Landed where? Henry, where on earth are you? Henry drew a deep breath and sighed, and he said, you remember when you were a kid and you'd go with your family to the beach, and how if you were digging in the sand, one of the grown-ups would invariably say that if you dug far enough, you'd reach? Henry, you're not going to tell me. That's right, he said. I'm calling you from China.
Okay, thanks, Bruce, from all the way on the East Coast and maybe China. So
And greetings to everybody out there on the left coast.
At the left coast. Can you tell us how you got involved with storytelling?
Well, Ed, you might not know this about me, but I was born in a log cabin that I helped my father build. And I never knew my mother. She left home before I was born. On one side of us lived Paul Bunyan, on the other side was Pecos Bill, so naturally I became a storyteller.
And after that, how did you get involved with storytelling?
Well, I had the good fortune to grow up in the Boston area where there's a lot of wonderful storytelling. Back in the 1980s, I saw J. O'Callahan, a national known teller, some of you may know, telling us his story, The Edge of the Sea. I sat in the front row, and he came on and introduced us to the crew of the ship that sailed halfway around the world to the Straits of Magellan. And we saw half the people on the crew. And when intermission time came and the lights came up and I was in a theater in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I just about had the top of my head blown off, and I was sold ever since.
Nice. Yeah, for those of you who don't know J. O'Callahan, look him up. He is still telling stories. And I don't know how old he is now, but he's
not young.
Storyteller. I think he's going to be at the International Storytelling Festival in Jonesboro, Tennessee in October.
Is that John Henry?
No, this is, I'm talking about J. O'Callahan. That's just a different storyteller. So our next storyteller is the local boy, John Petrick. He joined our group a couple of years ago and has been involved with the Sacramento Storytellers Guild and been to a few other storytelling events. And he's fairly new at the storytelling game here. And although I've taken a couple trips with him, and I can guarantee you, he knows how to lie.
I have a couple pictures I want to have
handy. Well, a couple years ago, I was riding my bicycle across South Dakota and I came across this covered wagon. And for those of you who can't read it, it says Ingalls Homestead, 3/4 mile. So you remember the Little House on the Prairie, the true story of the Ingalls family, Pa, Ma, Laura, and her sisters. And here it was, the real Little House on the Prairie. So I turn off on this gravel road, and the first thing you find is this white schoolhouse. And it's just like on TV, the long rows of desks, the big blackboard up front. And there's this woman in period costume sitting at the teacher's desk, and I pay my money and I look around, I ask her some questions, and she just talks and talks. She's lonely. Well, I extricate myself from there and I ride my bicycle up this little hill, and there it is, the Little House on the Prairie. But it's nothing like on TV. It's just this teeny little house with peeling paint, overlooking this dried out slough, surrounded by browning grass, no trees, just a few lilac bushes, and the wind is just howling across that prairie. It's like, looks like something out of the Depression or something. Well, there wasn't anybody there and the doors were locked, so I just got back on my bike and I started up on this little prairie trail up into town. And about halfway to town, I passed this little old man, and he's leading this spotted milk cow. So I get into town, DeSchmidt, South Dakota's real town, and I get a motel, I get a burger, and I'm walking back to my motel, and I see this spotted milk cow tied up in front of this bar. So I go in. There's the little old guy sitting at the table. He's already got like 4 empties in front of him. He waves over me. He says, "You're probably wondering about that cow out there." He says, "Well, I live with 4 women. So when I need to get out of the house, I tell Ma that Bessie jumped the fence again, and then I got to go find her. And that's how I get here." "Ray, get this guy a beer." That voice. Was that the voice I heard on NBC for all those years? "Pa? Are you Pa Ingalls?" "That's him, all right," said Ray. "Quite the picture, huh? And he owes 2 months on his bar tab, too." "Well, you know that ain't fair, Ray. Well, how was I to know I shouldn't have moved out to this dried out prairie? Why, that wind out there, it's gonna kill another crop. And living with all these women, well, it cuts a man deep, Ray. If I could rub 2 nickels together, I'd be out of here." Well, just then the door opened and this huge old man came in. He had this tall white cowboy hat, rounded, and he shows Ray his picture. "You seen this feller? I've been done looking for him for a lot of years. I reckon this picture's 50 years old or more." Pa Ingalls' eyes dropped out of his head. "Hoss? Hoss Cartwright?" "Yep, it's me, little brother. I've been looking for you for a long time, but you don't go by Little Joe no more." Oh, my eyes popped out. Little Joe Cartwright was Pa Ingalls. Well, Pa explained, well, back when Ma was a dance hall floozy in Virginia City and we ran off together, well, our Pa Ben, he disowned me and I changed my name. And South Dakota was opening up and we came here and we found a nice place overlooking a lake. That lake dried up and we ain't made a dime since, Hoss. I miss the Ponderosa. I miss the Sierras. I miss Lake Tahoe. Well, come on home, little brother. I still own part of the Ponderosa. Adam, he took the part on the lake and he made it into condos and now he's a lobbyist in Sacramento. With the part I kept, it's awful pretty, little Joe. And I run some cows and I could use a hand. Just then the door opened again. It was that lady from the schoolhouse. Pa, Ma sent me down here to drag you home again. That Bessie story ain't fooling nobody. What, you got a family, little brother? Yeah, Hoss. This is my daughter, Laura. Laura, this is my brother, Hoss. And well, Laura, I never told you about my family back by Lake Tahoe. We had this big ranch and it's so beautiful there, Laura. And well, you know, me and Ma, we ain't been getting along so good. And Hoss wants me to go with him and I'm thinking about going. Oh, Pa, take me with you. I'm so tired of this dried out prairie. Why? I'm hoping that someone would take me away. Today I was even hitting on a guy on a bicycle. Oh, Pa, I want to see the mountains. I want to see California. Well, Pa said, I think that answers it, Hoss. They slugged down their drinks and they headed toward the door. And just as they were leaving the door, Pa turned around and said, hey, stranger, would you make sure Bessie gets back to the farm? And Laura added, yeah, and tell Ma I ain't gonna pick the eggs in the morning no more. And so that's how me and Bessie ended up stumbling down a prairie trail into the sunset. Bum ba dum ba dum ba dum bum bum bum.
Good. Okay, boy, I remember the Ponderosa. That was old westerns. So, John, please tell us about how you got involved with storytelling.
Okay, so I had this teacher in fourth grade who used to read us these Laura Ingalls Wilder books about the Ingalls family. And she got me involved in this thing they called Declam, which was like competitive storytelling. Well, anyway, that was, 60 years ago. And then I took it up again about a year ago.
Nice. Very nice. Okay, so our judges are tabulating the scores, and we will announce the first, second, and third place winners when that is finished.
And send them to my email.
I got them.
Okay, all right, so
I sent the scores to Andy.
Got them. Ben Len, thank you.
You're welcome.
Well,
I'll tell you. Send them to me.
and Ben, how about you?
not
I
the
just sent them. Did you receive them?
I think so. Hold on.
Okay,
Yes, I have them, Ben. Thank you.
Well, there's plenty of wine and cookies.
yeah, there's plenty of wine and cookies if you want to go up and have some.
Yep, while they were working away.
Ooh, pass them over here.
And while you're doing that, you want to talk with each other. I'll tell you, one of the things that we are planning is on May 20th, next year, 2023, we are planning a storytelling festival. And we are going to do it from basically 1 to 9 o'clock at night with some nationally known tellers, local tellers. We got the inspiration from Mark Berry, who's here, and Sherry Anderson with the Auburn Storytelling Festival. So we are going to put on a regional festival. So we're in the planning stages right now. And we're going to have some local tellers and some, more international, national storytellers. And we're putting this together right now. So if anyone has any input, you can definitely. The date is May 20th, 2023. So about 1 year from now. Yep. It's going to be in Sacramento. Yes. We have a location. Remember the name?
Dante Club.
Huh?
Dante Club.
It's called the Dante Club in Carmichael. I think it's in Carmichael.
The Dante Club?
Yes.
Oh, that's got to be in hell then.
In where?
Hell.
Oh, yeah, right. The Dante Club, that's right.
And where'd you say hell was in Carmichael? Can we quote you on
Yes, I
that,
think-
Andy?
I'm not sure. Joyce, do you know where the Dante Club is?
What?
Do you know where the Dante Club, where our festival is going to be?
Yes, on
Fair Oaks Boulevard.
In Sacramento?
In in Sacramento. Yeah.
Well, I
Have you
knew-
stopped
I-
recording? You stopped recording?
Yeah, go ahead and stop recording.
Stop recording.
What's Vicky got?
And I do want to thank all the judges. We have 5 judges. We appreciate